Okay, so it looks like most of us joining today are from Title I, which is great. Thank you for joining us today to everyone. And then I'm going to go ahead and launch the second poll, which is just where you're joining us from today, so where your local area is. And we'll give everyone about 30 seconds to answer that for us today. Okay, so most of us are joining from northern and central and southern Illinois today. So we have a wide span, which is great. So thank you everyone for joining us today from all over the state. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Laura Dahm, our first presenter for today. Laura?
Good morning. Thank you, Kirsten. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar. Today's presenters will be Paula Berry and myself. The first slide, please, Kirsten. Today, we plan to discuss the first round of changes to the Illinois Workforce Development System that were brought about by policy and reporting directives at both the federal and the state level. Paula is going to talk about the main changes to the service menus in the system, and she will outline the new single service level for youth. And finally, Paula will provide you a preview of what the new services tables and definitions will look like. And please note that this is the first round and there will be more changes made in the future. Next slide, please. The changes to the system were brought about to align with the federal guidance and the work done by the core WIOA partner programs to have common service definitions. First of all, there was an update to the PIRL reporting online resources in January and June of this year. The TEGL 1219 provides a dislocated worker grant guidance, which several local areas have COVID grants. TEGL 1418 provided definitions and participation level service charts for the programs, and that was very instrumental in guiding our service changes. TEGLs 1916 for adults and dislocated workers and 2116 for youth were very, very instrumental, and some of the definitions came directly from those two guidances. TEGL 1316 is on our registered apprenticeship grants. And then TEGL 1016 change 1 is performance guidance for the core programs, and several things came from that as well, as far as the columns that you will see on the service table that indicates whether or not those particular services will be included in performance indicators or not. And finally, the Career Pathways Dictionary, where several of our state partners and stakeholders got together and developed definitions that everyone agreed upon to ensure alignment across agencies and programs. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, next slide, please. Well, it's not advancing, but I will go ahead there.
It's advancing on my screen.
Mine's advancing.
Okay. The one prior to this talks about us updating the new e-policy chapter 4.2.3. And we are beginning by changing the name of that policy from case management to career planning to align with WIOA terminology. We have updated the original text of that policy, which was the WIOA implementation guidance, to be updated with today's language and everything else. And we are going to we're updating the services chart that was attached to the exit policy, and it will be moved to this policy. Note that this policy will be provided to the Illinois Workforce Partnership for review prior to its official release. So there will be time for comments on the policy, but right now that should happen within the next day or so. The services chart will be updated to incorporate these shared definitions around ABE, ASE, and ELA, adult basic education, adult secondary education, and English language acquisition that were confirmed with the adult education partners. Updates to the registered apprenticeships based on the TEGLs and the PIRL reporting elements, and reconciling the work-based learning activities of work experience, that it's an individualized career service for reporting period purposes. However, for the Illinois Workforce Investment Board and the minimum training expenditure requirement, we are counting that towards training. And we also I want to let you know that the IWIB will be convening a work group, and their key goal will be to discuss career planning and coordinated intake across agencies. And out of that work group will hopefully be additional assessment guidance and other resources that will be attached to this policy for career planners to use. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, and this is where Paula is going to be discussing the updates to the services.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. So just like Laura said, this process has been going on for over a year of revamping our WIOA services. And part of how this all started is we realized that for you Title I people or anyone using IWDS, especially career planners, when you go in to record a service for a WIOA participant, just on the drop downs themselves, there were many different drop downs for our different programs, adult, dislocated worker, and youth. And among all of these drop downs were many different service labels, like names of services, that were old. They didn't apply to WIOA. They could have been JTPA or WIA. They were just never removed. So we took everything we had in our system and we kind of reconciled it with WIOA. All of those guidance letters that Laura mentioned, and she listed them. That's a really useful resource if you're ever wanting to look at a definition or have more detailed questions than what we'll provide you. So looking at that, so we looked at the PIRL to make sure that when we're providing a service to career planners to choose, we can be compliant in reporting that service appropriately, whether it be an individualized career or a training service. And these are reported to DOL, and there's other implications with how we report those for performance. And then OET's minimum training expenditure, certain services count. So we wanted to make sure that everyone's in compliance. When you see a service, you know what you're supposed to be providing, and you know what performance and other type of incentive outcomes that will lead to. What we also looked at, I explained before, is our programmers ran reports that listed all of the services in our system by adult, dislocated worker, and youth, and a count of how many times those services were each used in the past 3 years. So of course, when we saw a service might have been used 5 times, we realized it wasn't appropriate because you guys knew never to choose it, or it was old and it's not even applicable to WIOA, the WIOA programs. So, and during this, every couple months, we would meet with our management, or my management, and from fiscal, planning, grant managers, policy, and reporting, as well as policy collaborated with some other partners to make sure that our definitions were accurate, because I'm not an expert in all of the policy with adult education. So next slide, please. So what this led to was many of the drop downs in IWDS that are used daily by our career planners were very streamlined. They were minimalized. We labeled work-based learning services with the WBL, and you'll see this later. And that is because, like Laura mentioned, our minimum training expenditure policy says training. So work-based learning services, according to WIOA, are actually individualized career. So we found that with the different guidance and policies, this might be confusing. So we wanted to make this really clear for users in the system to identify things like this. The drop-down menus can be very long, so we tried to group supportive services together just with the SS, because those are provided in different ways than the other services. Again, we made sure that if a career planner is to choose the adult career level service, the only services they're going to be choosing in there are really career, and training are actually training. Because what we discovered is that many times we would have a career service on the career menu, but also on the training menu. No one's fault. They just, over the years, all of these different services kind of were mingled and co-mingled with these different menus. So we were just trying to make it easier and for everyone to remain compliant with the service you're providing the participant and in the correct level. And so for youth, what we saw with research looking at other states, it's really not mandated in any way that we had in IWDS all those different levels of services for youth, like summer youth. We had work-based, work-related, then a case management. So what we did, we have one menu, one drop-down for youth participants, where all of the services can be selected and viewed in that one menu. And then, of course, like we said, we implemented these changes into a test environment, and they were tested and tested by OET staff. And then we made a request, and many local areas staff helped us test these and identified some glitches, some things that didn't make sense. So we could test those again and put them back into IWDS correctly. The testing is ongoing, and what we expect, although these are solid and refined in the system, that daily users of these services may very well realize something or have insight and find something that just doesn't make sense still, because they're so knowledgeable about services and actual participants being served. So next slide, please, Kirsten. Okay, this screen is a shortened version of a document that I have created for all the users or LWIAs. So for example, we have a new WIOA career service and the old career service. So it's kind of a crosswalk. The old ones are not, the labels are not going to be available in IWDS. So for career planners, when you go into the system and you're looking for your case management service, that is a good old reliable service, was used quite a bit. It's renamed career planning, and this is because WIOA terminology is career planning. We have the case management in parentheses we'll eventually remove, but this is just part of the guidance. And where you see, I say Paula's Excel doc, services new versus old, I have that. It's a separate document, kind of like a worksheet or cheat sheet for you guys when you first go into IWDS on Thursday and see these new drop downs. The first service for adult and dislocated worker will be comprehensive guidance and assessments. So this is a new service to IWDS, but it's not new in the sense that before you guys had available all of these different services that could be selected at different times or different days depending. So comprehensive guidance and assessments for adult and dislocated worker career service is intended to capture services like tests, asset development, diagnostic testing, the in-depth interviewing and evaluation, personal counseling, I had that twice, sorry, individual job development and any real significant staff involved assessments when career planners are trying to sit down and figure out the best thing for the participant, whether it be training, a bunch of career services, a work-based learning, things like that. So career planners will be not seeing all of these in the dropdowns in IWDS. And the policy table is going to be the guiding technical assistance document and your go-to to provide all of the answers to questions when you're using IWDS to enroll participants in services. Another one that's been around forever, this group, we had a group workforce research, we had workshops, job clubs, everyone uses these. We realized on our usage reports that they were very frequently used, but they were all over the place in the drop-down menus to select, so we just combined them into one service. That's an example of something we did. A big one is adult basic education. This used to be available in the training drop-down in IWDS, which was not appropriate, and there were different service labels that could be selected for a participant to indicate this one single service was being provided. So we got watered down reporting when all of these services were being selected. So adult basic education, parentheses, developmental education is the equivalent of your old, I see a question that just popped up. So I'm gonna get to that in 1 second because that's actually training. Yeah, okay, so sorry, Kirsten, I'm still on this. So adult education and literacy activities, basic academic training, remedial training, other academic training, and we even had like an other vocational training out there, right? So remedial training is no longer a term that is used. That is really actually developmental education, this new service, adult basic education, and this is not considered training. Remedial training will no longer be reported as training to DOL. So a customer in a remedial training is not going to be in the training measure outcomes. And I'm going to talk about this later. So you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so these are new training services that were added to the system. So I forget who just asked that question. So the old IWDS, the old service that in IWDS was equivalency GED, which I believe local areas and career planners use to indicate secondary education, has been replaced with placed in adult secondary education, parentheses, ASE. So out of all the services you used to see on the career menu or training, remedial is no longer available and it shouldn't have been training, but your secondary education, your high school, GED, high set, all of those services, you will now select placed in secondary education. And this measure will include adults, dislocated workers, and youth in the measurable skills gain and credential attainment measure at exit. So yes, it is considered your high school training service. So it's new. The label is new on the menu, but it's not new. It's been around forever. So we just no longer call it equivalency GED. And some of the reasoning that we discussed, like we spent a half a day sometimes just trying to vet the definition and the label to make it make sense. And equivalency GED is actually an outcome, not a service. So a brand new service in the training menu for adult dislocated workers and then the youth service elements menu is a non-registered apprenticeship. So this is new. It is everything like a registered apprenticeship, but it's non-registered with DOL. So it will go through the ETPL requirements. And I just noted it's not previously available in IWDS. So it's something you may, if you're examining these new menus for the first time, you may wonder what that is. And the policy table will also defines this very well. And you know, the training service, skill upgrading and retraining, it used to be split out into two services, skill upgrading, and then I believe a vocational retraining, two separate services that really mean the same thing. And that's going to be available for adult and dislocated workers and youth. So not just dislocated worker, which I think there used to be guidance that led areas to believe that it would only pertain to that program. So next slide, please. And you can keep raising your hand and stopping me anytime because it's a lot of information and it'll be hashed out over the next several weeks or months because I hope to provide like quick 30-minute webinars just for questions that come up for you guys and all the career planners. So this is just an overview. The career and training level service menus in IWDS have been updated. Obviously, I kind of just went over that. Only career services are going to be available on your career service dropdown, and the training services are only allowed on training service dropdown, which does make sense. But you know, when you're used to things, people have those menus memorized, I believe, and we just kind of want the menus themselves to be a tool. So when you select service, it's going to be reported correctly, and there won't be any non-compliance issues because we had a career service or a training service over in career and you weren't even doing training. So the background on this also is in the past there were some work-based learning services on the training menu, and I get that's work-based learning type training, but really to DOL, they're reported as individualized career services, even though you get credit for the minimum training expenditure for these. So that is made a little clearer in those menus. Next service, please, or next slide, please, Kirsten. This is just an informational slide. So all of these services have been removed from the training level in IWDS because they're not reported as training services. Again, this is kind of just shows you how many services were shown on that training menu that if you selected them, they weren't training and they wouldn't lead to the MSG or credential measure. And again, I said see Paula's new versus old document. I will give you. And you see, I noted that pre-apprenticeship training has been sitting around on the training menu for quite a while, but it's never reported as a training service, and I mean, in fact, it isn't. The job readiness combined with other forms of training has been on that training list for a long time. And when I started doing reorganizing these services, I couldn't figure out, it sounded like training, but in fact, it's a career service if it's not provided with another training. And that vocational retraining, that was just, it was removed. I think people did use that a lot. So I just want to make sure everyone realizes when you go for that, it's skill upgrading and retraining. And the training services that we now have in IWDS mimic the PIRL. I mean, they're identical. We use the same labels and everything. So that'll be really straightforward for reporting to DOL. And we can go to the next slide, please. I see 9 questions in the chat. Would you like me to stop? Am I moving too fast, or are we good here? Okay, so service reporting, again, whether a service be career or training, has performance implications. Every WIOA participant is going to be included in our employment performance measures. So if you only receive a career service, you only get a service off of that menu, you're going to be, well, I shortened them. I call them the WIOA employment performance measures now. And it's really just the employment second quarter after exit, employment rate fourth quarter after exit, and then the median earnings for those who are employed second quarter after exit. So career services, any service is going to lead participants to be included in all of those performance measures. Next slide, please. So I want to point out again, and I don't want to make this about performance, but on the new policy table we're going to introduce, because I know we had a ton of questions like this, the training services tab, where you see all your training services, there's a column that we place to indicate the measure for which the service will trigger inclusion at exit. And the reason we did this is because all of the training services are not viewed equally as far as performance inclusion. And there's those two outliers, the OJT and the customized training for youth. I mean, not for youth, for adult and dislocated workers. OJT's customized training, absolutely reported as training on the PIRL, but if you only receive one of those, an adult or dislocated worker isn't going to be in the credential measure. They're only going to be in your measurable skills gain. But all of the other services, and as indicated, they'll be in the MSG and credential measure. So I just always want to point that out. And the next slide, please. So as far as the screens in IWDS are concerned, even though the menus have changed, the way a service is recorded is exactly the same, except for the Service of Registered Apprenticeship Program, RAP. We determined that DOL doesn't want, when a participant is only in a registered apprenticeship, they're asking, please don't separately choose their OJT or skill upgrading with that. So they're just going to be, we're just going to report that registered apprenticeship program. But we would like to see when an OJT or skill upgrading is provided as part of that. So we added a check drop downs to that service screen, and it's really intuitive. I mean, you can't get past it without picking your OJT or skill upgrading, and then that's when the employer is also required. I will note, and we'll get into this later, that some of our local areas who did some testing in this and actually provide registered apprenticeship programs, there are some out there that are shorter in duration than your traditional registered apprenticeships. So those drop downs might not be applicable, and we're looking into that. The other service where we've had it forever, training paid by non-WIOA Title I funds, we added the Title I to it. This screen now provides a drop down where you will be required to select the other type of funding. So what the drop down includes is apprenticeship expansion, other, and you can specify it, then a private sector training, public sector training. It gives the choice to identify the WIOA Title II, Title III, or Title IV, other type of funding. And we can get into the appropriateness of using this service and some additional technical assistance on these definitions. But really, if you are co-enrolled in another WIA or grant, and say you're providing a lot of career services, but no training, you may want to select this service for the participant so you can identify, look, we have these other type of services going on, but the Title I isn't paying for their actual training. So we can talk about that later. And so this service, I will point out that since it's not reported as training, because it's not going to be a Title I funded training, it's available on both the career and training level drop downs, and then the one single youth drop down. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the revised screen for when you're adding a registered apprenticeship service, and you would just see the statement there, the registered apprenticeship is public OJT or private, or it's going to include a skill upgrading service element. So we can capture when that's going on. Next slide, please. And this is a screenshot of what your new training paid by non-WIOA Title I funds service screen will look like. And I just gave you a screenshot of that actual drop down. Works, and these screens work exactly the same as they always have, but for these new fields. So next screen, please. Okay, so if anyone has any questions right now, I see 10 here. I can see my own chat. Yes, everyone can have the PowerPoint. High school equivalency is now adult secondary education, placed in adult secondary education. Did I miss any?
I don't believe so, no. And if anyone would like to raise their hand and be unmuted at this time, you can do so.
Okay, I think that there were a couple of questions that didn't apply to my presentation.
Yes.
Okay.
And me and Mark answered those.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so we can move on to youth.
There's a question from Deb Angleton.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, what was it? Is it?
Deborah would like to know, is the training in no WIOA funding counted in credentials?
It is not. Training paid by non-WIOA Title I funds will not count the participant in MSG or credentials if that's their only indication of a training service. The whole purpose of that service is if you want to track that they have some training going on outside their Title I services, because it kind of validates potentially supportive services or career services. And if they kind of look like they're going along with training, we could come in and be like, why are you giving them this? They're not in training. And you're like, well, yeah, they are. It just wasn't Title I. So that's the appropriate, one example of an appropriate time to record that. But it is displayed very clearly that, well, on the policy table, Debbie, that is not going to include them in or MSG and credential. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because and you don't have to use that service. These services are available, but not every LWIA may have a time where it's appropriate to use that service. So I just want to make that clear. It's not like we have to be seeing all of these reported. DOL at this time doesn't really say, hey, why didn't you report this many, I don't know, I can't think of an example, certain training service. Why are you so low on your prerequisite services? They're not doing that yet, but we just want to make sure they're available. So WIOA Title I service updates for youth. Many are new in IWDS, and the big change is that, like I said, instead of serving a youth by going and clicking work-related, academic type services, then you had the summer youth, then you had to click a separate level for case management just to get to your case management and ISS. So this was confusing, and no other states were doing, and it actually wasn't an appropriate way to do it. The other really confusing thing that I found is that they were all kind of intermingled. There were some services that were on the work-related and academic learning menu, and on top of it, these levels didn't drive any real reporting to DOL, because all youth are reported together, except for some occupational training. So there was really no purpose. And then what we found was that, and it was the 21, 17 or 16 TEGL, attachment 7, and it's the 14 required youth elements that must be available to be offered to youth participants by law. So we just made sure that those elements were very clearly labeled on the youth service elements and education, training, and career menu. And the definitions, like Laura said, we took a lot of the definitions right out of the TEGLs on the policy table, but we had to abbreviate them a little bit. So they're on pages 14 through 23 of TEGL 2116. So you might want to note that if you ever have a question when you're going to enroll a youth. And then of course that attachment 7 is really useful because that's exactly where we pulled all these elements out of. Here I see a question, Michelle. So if a public parents pay for training. Well, Michelle, I think that since they're not going to be in the credential measure, if Title I isn't paying for the training, then you wouldn't be on the hook for it anyway. But if they were in actual other training service, if they paid for a part of it and then WIOA Title I had them in another training, they would be on the hook for the credential and you would count that. So let me know if that answers your question. Next slide, please, Kirsten. Okay, so in this long single drop down of youth services, there were new services that our programmers had to create and add to the database table that we identified by really examining the PIRL. And what we have been missing through the years was that youth, OJTs, private and public, same label as the adults, but they're for youth, are separate. They're completely different services and they're reported differently because in fact for youth, OJTs are not counted as training. Adult and dislocated worker, OJTs are training, not for the credential measure, but absolutely the measurable skills gain measure. Youth in an OJT are not included in performance indicators, not even the MSG. And then we have what we identified as an internship that is specific to youth and it's summer months only. So it's a new way to identify an internship that took place only in the summer months and it's only for youth. So that's only going to be available to select from the youth menu. And we did go ahead and put the prefix WBL on there because they're types of work-based learning. And then for youth, what we did do, like Laura noted, there's a column that says WEX 20%, and we put a yes or no if enrollment in that service would count towards the youth work-based learning 20% requirement. Youth entrepreneurial skills training. So we've always had the entrepreneurial skills training, but based on WIOA law, it's totally separate for youth. It's reported separately. And then again, like for adult and dislocated worker, we have the non-registered apprenticeship added, which is just like a registered apprenticeship, not certified by DOL. So that type of apprenticeship program is going to need to go through ETPL certification. And I put, okay, you can move to the next slide, please, Kirsten. I want to note something. When you see the 3-digit numbers, for those of you who aren't familiar, these are the values that the programmers that are in our IWDS tables. And sometimes they're really useful because when we have, like I mentioned, the OJT for adult and the OJT that's youth only, sometimes when you realize those values are different, it can help some organization. And it was really, really useful in preparing all of the tables and things we did to instruct the programmers on the exact changes that needed to be made and services removed or moved to different levels and created as brand new. So I want to point out, so in the youth service elements education career, that's going to be the label of the service level that you will see. Now, I know that there was some confusion in the past and the way we had all those services. So youth career services do not trigger participation in the MSG or credential attainment rate performance measures. there used to be some confusion around tutoring, study skills, instruction, and dropout prevention. That's separate now. Alternative school dropout recovery service is going to include your adult basic education, developmental education, and English language education. I know we've been going back and forth for quite a while, like over a year now, that alternative school dropout recovery should include a youth in the performance measures. It should be the equivalent of a secondary school, but in fact it is not. In the attachment 7 of the youth TEGL 2116, it is clearly identified as a career service, so it's not compliant to report it as a training. But again, we have the placed in adult secondary education, which is your high school service. So next question. Oh, that's it for youth for now. So are there any questions? I want to show you our new policy table. I could probably even get into our training environment in IWDS if we think that would work live, and just pull up a customer and show you guys what you're going to be looking at. Oh, thanks, Laura.
One question.
Sure.
Oh, I guess I'm not on mute. Hi, could I ask a follow-up question to the last slide? So currently, when we put somebody in, so in this new drop-down menu, we're going to have to put them into the what was that? Secondary?
Yeah, it's going to be called
alternative.
Will you go back to that slide, please, Kirsten? Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so currently, if we have a person from an alternative school, right? Mm-hmm. And they're going to be going for their high school diploma, and doing credit recovery, so forth. Mm-hmm. We would then enroll them, and they would go into the skills measures and credential measures, all of those things, and that's considered a training service. But under this definition, alternative school students, when we enroll them into the program, they're not going to be considered training? So we got to do it under secondary ed?
Yes, alternative school and dropout recovery services alone are strictly career, but you would record a placed in adult secondary education at the point they were placed in the high school.
So we would then open up that secondary service?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
If it were being provided. So, and it does make sense, because I think that, and I mean, Laura and I literally for days, because it's like, then you wonder if, since the adult secondary, even the high school is only one condition of meeting the credential attainment rate, were the intentions of it to put them in, make it harder and put them in the credential measure? And we decided yes. And then on top of it, it's like, I think a lot of times it could be funded by adult ed, but with all the research and the vetting we did, that's how it's going to be set up. And then if for some reason they were in dropout recovery services, only like adult basic education, and they weren't ever placed in secondary school, then you wouldn't be on the hook for getting their credential if they really didn't have that secondary school element. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because before, what I was finding is that the way certain services that were set up in IWDS to include youth or any participant in the MSG or credential weren't right, because remedial was one that is flagged to include a participant in MSG and credential, but really that's development education, and that isn't going to lead to anything. So I think the LWIAs were finding alternative ways around or to get them in the measure when it was appropriate, but as far as the service names and how they were reported to DOL, it wasn't correct. So this is mapped straight from the PIRL. So that's going to be one of the biggest like learning curves about using these new services.
Yeah, yeah, I can see where it can get kind of confusing. So if I could use a hard and fast example real quick.
Yes.
I have people in the credit recovery programs. They're actually in attendance. They're coming into us and applying for the program, and they're like 17, 18 years old. So they would be considered in-school youth, and they would be enrolled under then secondary education.
Yes, and see, the in-school youth are going to be in the measures no matter what, because they're in school. So even if you had an alternative school dropout recovery service only for them, they're going to be in your measurable skills gain and credential. This would apply to an out-of-school youth if they only ever had the alternative school or dropout recovery service and you didn't put them in the placed in secondary.
Okay.
They wouldn't be in your measures. So it's really for the out of school youth where you'll want to pay attention when that takes place, when they're placed in secondary, to get that recorded. But when you see in the dropdown, it's going to make it easier, because I think it was really confusing when we had advanced academic, other vocational, remedial, equivalency GED, because that's really what we're tracking now as like an outcome. So
that makes sense. Thank you.
Because it was very confusing to me for a long time. I'm like, should it be put them in or not? But yes. Okay, next slide, please. Unless anyone, okay.
There was a question in the chat.
Okay. I missed it.
And I believe Laura answered it. So we should be good.
Did you get the one? Oh, TEGL 10, is that Laura answered it with TEGL 1016. So GED is counted as a credential, yes, but they also need to be employed or in education. And for the MSG, I should point out that secondary high school transcripts count as an MSG, and then the diploma counts, and then the GED itself counts. But the modules or courses leading up to the attainment of the, I shouldn't say MSG, the GED, those don't count like as secondary school transcripts or tests leading up to it. It's the diploma itself when it's only going to be the GED. But that used to be some confusion. So just again, I'm just kind of reiterating here. I'm going to show you this table that's replacing that table that was attached to the old exit policy that was gray and white and kind of all divided up and just in some type of word type table. So we're replacing the old services chart with WIOA definitions policy table. And then again, we're including columns to identify services that count towards your MSG or credential, the minimum training expenditure requirement, work-based learning, and then we added a column that would clearly identify the services that are same day only. So when you go in and record a career service, you would know that that service should only be provided one time on the same day, and it's never going to extend participation in WIOA. So the records will have to be updated with services if only provided same day. And then we use IWDS 5X test environment, and that's where we had some findings and reports and fixes and updates, and what the local areas identified many services that really should be a same day service. And then we did identify that supportive services, I know we were going back and forth and they've been changed in the past couple of years, Right now, no supportive services are made same day. So it's up to the LWIAs to determine the appropriateness of opening and closing a supportive service on the same day. Youth internships. Okay, yes, I can show you this. We can even go back. Youth internship is now going to be called WBL internship, in parentheses, youth, summer only, or limited to summer, because that's its own service just for youth. And then we have an WBL, work-based learning internship, not limited to summer. The internships that aren't limited to summer are going to be available as a career service for adult and dislocated worker, and they'll be on the youth service menu as well. But again, the internship that is limited to summer is not available for adult and dislocated worker. It's only going to be available to select on the youth menu. So that kind of, kind of avoids some potential data entry mistakes, just because a lot of them have the same labels, but for a youth in parentheses. So we tried to separate them that way just to eliminate mistakes, because there's so many services. So next slide, please. Okay, so I just want to make sure everyone's aware that this policy table and the guidance you're being given is solid and it's accurate, but for round 2, we're going to make some service refinements. We've identified a couple services that are probably needed, and they just have to do with identifying paid versus unpaid work-based learning type experiences, and that will be later. What our goal, what we intend to do with these is provide ongoing technical assistance and guidance for everyone. And this is for definitions and appropriateness of using the different services, and when they should be recorded. Then for those who are interested, we'll get into how we're going to be reporting them on the PIRL, and things like that. So with that, I think that's my last slide. And if there are any more questions, and then of course, you can always contact me by email, and we'll be reaching out to let you know when those technical assistance calls will be coming up. So right now, and I know we have until 11:30, I wanted to save everyone some time and get done sooner, but I would like to show you, I thought I whittled this down, so I only had my one, but this is what I'm going to provide everyone, and you can use it or not. The policy table is really the guidance here, but this is kind of a cheat sheet worksheet. You can print it. I'm not 100% done. So it's like the new service list. This is what the only choice you're going to have to record. And you could see this and be like, but wait, where is the case management service? Well, it's career planning. This happens to be training. And I just made a label of old services no longer available in the training level dropdown. I added a note of maybe what we've done. The non-registered apprenticeship, like I said many times, is new. Registered apprenticeship, you're going to notice a difference on the screen. And then the rest of them where I don't have an old service label, it's because it's always been there. The services that were totally removed, other non-occupational skills training. We used to have services out there like other vocational training, other academic training. If they were used, which was very infrequently, I don't think they were being mapped or appropriately reported on the PIRL. So they were just removed. And these are all your new labels. Then this is the 1A, 1D career, that adult basic education that we call developmental education now for adult and dislocated worker is a career service only. And I believe that LWIAs and career planners may have been selecting, of course, adult ed and literacy, but sometimes maybe basic or remedial or other academic to try to indicate what the meaning of the service is, really this developmental. Same for this comprehensive and specialized assessments all over the place in both the training and the career menus for adult and dislocated worker. We had all these different kind of random services, all which roll up to mean that a comprehensive or specialized assessment was being provided. So when you see these shrunken menus, much shorter drop downs, this is where they have gone. There's another one. Oh, again, the group workforce. We put those all in the label, so hopefully it will be easy to see and find. Job search activities and assistance, which is provided by staff. It's not the self, obviously. There were all kinds of different little service labels in those menus that I think were selected to mean job search and activities and assistance provided by staff. We had a couple different services lingering out there that meant relocation assistance out of area. Again, they refer to employment, workforce prep. There's a very distinct definition now in our policy table, and it encompasses all of these type of activities. And then I'll note here, let me get to, since I'm sharing my screen. I'm sorry, I had this pulled up. I must have clicked out of it. Okay. This, I want to shrink it a little bit. This document will be the policy table with all of the service definitions that we keep referring to. I'll just explain the career service tab very quickly. They're all the same format. We have a career.
We're not seeing anything. We're not seeing anything, Paula. Anything different?
Oh, I'm sorry. Here.
Did you freeze your, there you go, Paula.
New share. I'm sorry. So this is the document that Laura and I are referring to, and Laura, you can jump in anytime, about the policy table. So this is your main resource for services. And here you're going to be able to find the exact service names that will appear in the IWDS dropdown. I want to point out they're going to be in a different order than the IWDS dropdown, and that's just a technical thing because the IWDS dropdowns, the way the system is, they're organized alphabetically or numerically. So we're going to work to get what you see in the dropdowns to be in the same order as these service elements on your policy guidance chart. So we have a tab for 1A and 1D, adult and dislocated worker career, adult and dislocated worker training, all encompassing youth service elements. We separated out supportive services to be on its own tab and have identified all of the supportive services and the appropriateness of providing them. Laura thought, which was really smart, to create a separate tab for follow-up because it's on its own. And then I want to point out that for the COVID grants, we have a whole new service level in IWDS that is identified as disaster recovery services. And these apply to those grant participants only. And we're going to leave that technical assistance to Tammy or Jill. So I'm going to go back to adult and dislocated worker career and make it a little bigger. The final copy that you all will be provided won't have these PIRL element, the first two columns on it. This, we could make it available, but these are exactly how for us to track how each one of these services is going to be reported to the PIRL based on the activity level. So all of these career services map, like they match right up to these PIRL elements. This is, again, the name of the service as it will appear in IWDS. This is the value that the programmers use in the tables in IWDS to identify it. I very well might, we may include these in parentheses on the drop downs in IWDS, if only just to identify and organize them. And then, of course, the definition. These are some notes because it was in Teams. This column for career services says we owe a performance measure. Well, like I said earlier, any career service for a participant, you're going to be in the employment measures. So this is just consistent all the way down. MTE, that minimum training expenditure. Nope, this is career. No. This is going to be where some technical assistance comes in because there will probably be questions. When short-term pre-vocational services is a standalone career, they're never going to be in any type of training. Of course, they're only going to be in your employment measures. But to be in training or to be true job readiness, they have to have another training service with it, maybe a prerequisite, even occupational skills. What we did here, and then of course the definition, work-based learning experiences are grouped all together one by one. This is the general header. This is the general overarching definition of what a work-based learning experience is. And then they're all identified. Of course, all a yes here, even though they're not training. This is the career menu, but they are included on that minimum training expenditure account. Workforce preparation, that service has been around. We just really refined the definition thanks to Laura. Financial literacy services, hopefully here. And then here's your same day service column. So out of area job search, obviously that's a same day service. Something like a career that's English language education taking longer. So we're not going to make you close that on the same day. Then these are basic career services, but they're staff assisted basic career services. So we're doing some work to refine these definitions. And they map straight to the PIRL. Then for each tab with the actual services, career, training, and youth, we just put the supportive services on a separate tab so you can identify them there. I know that on the old guidance or on the old services list, they were in a separate section, but I can't remember what that was. So, and then I just want everyone to note that Laura worked with John Barr to really refine the supportive services, the supportive service that's been around forever called healthcare, and then other supportive services was updated to include or omit elements that were missing or weren't appropriate. And we didn't want to have this guidance, this policy table out there for you guys to be available to select a supportive service or do something that might not be appropriate because of guidance for like a potential disallowed cost. So that might be something you notice when you look at this. And again, I showed you follow-up services. I want to go to the training services really quick. So same format, we included the PIRL elements. These are the labels that appear in IWDS, again with their definition, and you'll see performance measure, and this means that if you're provided this is the performance measure you're in. And we clearly identified that like these OJTs, you're only going to be in the MSG, but whereas a skill upgrading and retraining, that's Laura really refined this definition, so it includes everything it should. MSG and credential, just like, and then the customized training again is not going to include a participant in the credential measure. The rest of them pretty much will. This is the new non-registered apprenticeship program, and Laura has worked to update the definition and provide guidance about when to use this training paid by non-WIOA Title I funds, and we noted this selection. And then if when in doubt, these tables all have the performance measures that are going to be impacted by these. And of course, like we got the question for training, that's an NA. And then the asterisks just also explain once again that OJT or skill upgrading aren't recorded separately. If you know that participant is also in a registered apprenticeship, that's why we updated that registered apprenticeship screen so you can count them there. And then these are just definitions of those columns that, that flag the measures that they're going to be in. Now for the youth, so even though we included all 14 elements and refined some and combined all of the youth services into one long drop down in IWDS, it's not that much more because there were so many services in there that were arbitrary, never used, didn't really mean anything, or should have been rolled up under other services. So here's your new youth services definition table. You can see that the definitions for like the tutoring element 1 are much more detailed. So I just think that this is going to serve as a really good technical assistance document when in doubt. You should find a lot of information here. And we, of course, indicate the measure, the youth work-based learning experience, the ones that count. Here's your alternative school and dropout recovery service. See, youth aren't reported separately, like for adult dislocated worker, we have that training and career that will guide you in what you're choosing. But there are youth training, occupational training, intermingled with the youth career, but we're not supposed to report them separately. So they're all here. And the way you'll know if it's training is because we'll have the training performance measure indicated. As well as on my worksheet cheat sheet, I highlighted the youth that are in this big menu that are actually youth training. And then for youth 2, Laura had grouped all of the work-based learning together and highlighted it. Here's your youth internships, youth summer months. So that's going to be your summer youth. And then also for youth, you have the internship that's not limited to summer. And again, these are not WIOA training. However, the work-based learning experience count towards the WEX. And then coming in round 2, for a while we've had, the short-term pre-vocational skills training for adults. Laura identified that we have been lacking this service for youth. So our programmers have to create a new service and add it to the database. And the new one that's going to be available is going to be called Employability Skills Job Readiness Training for Youth. And this will be one more service element that you can identify and count towards your WEX. Thanks to Laura. I think I missed that one. Occupational skills training for youth, that's different than adults. Skill upgrading is the same. And if you ever wonder, it's these element numbers that identify the ones that are totally off separate for youth or kind of the same for adult and dislocated worker. Customized training is going to count towards your youth work-based or work experiences. Prerequisite will not. registered apprenticeships should, see, this is a work in progress, but I think that's the only one that could have been off. And then here again is your placed in adult secondary education. If you notice this, where we explain the PIRL, so these are all the PIRL training elements over here, 130311. All that DOL told us was that they consider a category of training for adult dislocated worker and youth other non-occupational skills training. So they didn't include placed in adult secondary under there, and there was other language that would seem like it was that this adult secondary was kind of excluded for training because it didn't lead to the post-secondary credential. So after a lot of research, that's where we identified. So that's where if you have an out-of-school youth and they're just in that alternative school, but they get placed into actual secondary education services, you need to record this 431, as well as for adult and dislocated workers. It's only your in-school youth that you could get away without recording that and still get them into your MSG and credential attainment rate measures. Non-registered apprenticeship, again, even though it's not the DOL certified, it is an apprenticeship and it's going to put them in the measure. This concurrent conceptual training, it was defined only in that youth TEGL, the 2116. And this label is what it was named in DOL's guidance. So we just shortened it to name it, to call it that label. Leadership development, this is actually defined. I think that old services table didn't really have a thorough definition. I had questions about adult mentoring from someone who was testing. And like you can see on my cheat sheet, we used to just have mentoring and it's only allowed for youth. But the thing is, when we added adult, because we copied DOL's guidance, it sounds like it's meant for adult, but what the adult word, the label actually means is it's the adult providing the mentoring. And we never had a good definition for this before, but this is coming right out of the Act. So you'll probably want to review all these too. And then we have the comprehensive guidance and counseling. This was on there, but without a clear definition. And this is really specific to alcohol and substance abuse counseling that some areas probably might not even have the resources to provide. So that can be referred. All types of elements added to financial literacy services. And of course, the entrepreneurial skills training. And this is extensive because we included every single youth element as well as other services that are offered. So any questions? This has been around forever. The definition was updated and taken right out of the youth TEGL 2116. So that is what you all will be provided to use as your new services definitions. If you have any comments, and it's a draft right now because there probably will be questions and you guys might think of things that we didn't.
So there's a couple questions in the chat, Paula.
Where is the chat?
Since you're sharing your screen, it should be at the top of your screen. We had Dana ask when they will get a copy of the documents.
After this webinar.
I answered Maureen on the same-day service for job clubs, and yes, that is reflected in the table that it can be a same-day service. And I also wanted to point out to everyone that right now we know that the work-based learning, the one shown in green, will need to be reworked, and that's part of round 2. But we're going to be working with everyone to try to determine how best to do that. Right now, most of all career planners are using the generic header catch-all of work-based learning, of work experience. And that hasn't, so we're not capturing the pre-apprenticeships and the internships and everything properly. So we're going to rework those and make sure that we get those put in there properly so that everybody can get out what they need to get out of it. But we didn't want to eliminate the one-size-fits-all service, since that's the one that most everybody uses right now. So that will be coming in round 2, and it will mostly be a refinement and a training issue on which of the services should be selected.
I still can't see my chat. I could stop sharing. Here. Oh, here, sorry.
I don't see any other questions that Laura hasn't addressed. While we're waiting for some other questions to come through, I did want to note that any corresponding handouts or presentation materials, as well as these PowerPoint slides and the recording of today's webinar, will be available on our website as well as the Illinois WorkNet website. And I put that website for our center in the chat to everyone.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Paula or Laura, did you have anything else for today or any closing thoughts? Are we still wanting to wait for questions to come in?
Well, I think a lot of people were able to put their questions in the chat box. People are welcome to continue to put questions there or contact either Paula or myself should that you think of any questions after the webinar. We should hopefully be providing you with these draft documents later today, and keep in mind that they are draft. We should be finalizing them before too long, but we want to make sure that we put them out to the field to get some input back, and for the policy to be presented to the Illinois Workforce Partnership prior to it being finalized and submitted. So I'm not sure that we have any other questions in the chat. So I definitely want to make sure that everyone knows the amount of work that Paula put in on this. It has been pretty exhaustive. We've had several meetings with OET staff to try to get this worked out, but just the amount of work put into this table has been quite a bit. So I want to make sure to publicly thank Paula for all of the work that she's done on this. It's been outstanding.
Well, thank you, Laura, but I couldn't have done it without you. We all know Laura's policy mind, so I could get lost a couple times. So, but obviously, and actually, Mark, there's 6 questions. Mark Burgess and I were trying to figure out the best way to provide technical assistance on these. So if anyone has any comments, you can bring it up in task force or to me or Mark. If it's just a call or a 30-minute like Tuesday webinar, and that's just so if someone thinks of a question, they're just not emailing me. I mean, you know, we're going to have a Q&A for it. So I hope it's not as confusing as I think once you get into IWDS, it will be much more simplified. And we did get some input and feedback from the field that it did seem easier. So I am totally open to opinions and suggestions with some of this. I hope to talk to you soon, and thanks so much for being on here for an hour and a half today.
Yes, thank you, Paula and Laura, for presenting. I hope everyone found this information very valuable. Again, all of the resources and presentation information, as well as this recording, will be on our website. I did put that in the chat. That website will also be on your follow-up email tomorrow. And we just ask that you provide us with any follow-up information about future webinars or about this topic specifically, and we can relay that to Laura and Paula, or you can feel free to connect with them as well. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. And everyone have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks. Goodbye.